あらあら。
Hey guys, Mr. Pookie here, back with another video. Welcome to the first episode of CN Hypewatch, where I'll be going through with you guys the CM Bros opinion for an upcoming battle unit, this time featuring Kafka. Kafka has been the most anticipated limited unit since HSR was released, creating one of, if not the biggest simp army known to gacha game. So of course, with anticipation comes discussion. Amongst the English community, there's been a ton of discussion regarding her pool value and builds ranging from crit Kafka, Kafka with Serval, Luka or Sampo, Kafka as the only main DPS, DOT being expensive to raise, DOT being cheap to raise, Kafka being bottom tier, Kafka competing with Sile, Kafka is only meant for whales, or Kafka is just great for F2Ps, right? I'm not here to discredit any of the viewpoints from the community or content creator, since each of them stems from a point of view that holds their own logic and reasoning. As we've seen from the whole Goba Smack drama, HSR is fundamentally a pretty easy game where optimization is really not that important if whatever build or team you're using can help you 30 out of 30 MOC, which is our current endgame content. The purpose of CN Hypewatch is to simply provide my viewers with an alternative perspective from another community, one that is more driven by numbers and efficiency. This series is not intended to be a guide. If you guys need a guide, please kindly check out my CN unit analysis, and I'll definitely be doing one for Kafka in the near future. Right. This entire series is purely opinions and speculations on our Mami Kafka. Right. So with that out of the way, let's just jump straight into today's content. Let's first talk about Kafka's individual speculations, biggest one being stacking crit ratio or attack percentage. Now, the decision of whether to stack crit or attack will largely be dependent on a unit's multipliers. If a unit's base damage is exceedingly strong compared to a DOT, then stacking crit ratio will benefit much more. For Kafka, her biggest mechanic is to trigger all DOTs on target, and as we all know, this skill, as well as all DOTs in the game, cannot crit. The only damage that Kafka can benefit from critting is her basic attack and the initial damage from her skill, ultimate and follow-up. Furthermore, building crit ratio on Kafka does not just constitute sacrificing an EHR or attack percentage chest for a crit rate / crit damage chest, because you also have to invest in valuable substats into crit ratio as well, since you want to try and achieve an 1:2 crit ratio to crit damage with any crit focused DPS. A crit build with only one crit main and 0 crit ratio subs is underwhelming to say the least. Considering that every Nihility unit lacks crit in their tracers and light cone, with the exception of Silver Wolf's incessant raid, stacking crit ratio will be equivalent to swimming upstream when there's a ship right beside you, and that ship is known as attack / speed. With miHoYo heavily pushing for Kafka as the enabler for DOT with this DOT trigger mechanic, CN players highly recommend going for the attack route, supplementing her with as much speed as possible. This build will hold true irregardless if she's the main DPS, sub DPS, or even support in the future when a 5-star DOT unit with insane DOT multipliers comes. Energy regeneration. This is a pretty short one since some players noted that since we want to stack so much attack on Kafka, why not use an energy regeneration rope on Kafka since she's already getting so much attack from other sources, right? In CM Bros opinions, this is pointless unless you have very high idleness, since she can already ultimate in 3 turns without using an energy regeneration rope, while at the same time, energy regeneration rope cannot guarantee her ultimate in 2 turns, right? So as a result of this, just stick to attack rope and Kafka will be a-okay. How much speed do we build on Kafka ultimately boils down into the speed sheet. As we know, Kafka does want a lot of speed so that she can cast her ultimate and cast her skill as frequently as possible, triggering all the DOTs stacked on the target. So based on our current speed sheet that we have right now, the speed benefits are ultimately dependent on whatever numbers we see over here. If we miss it by even 1 speed, we are no longer able to get the extra turn for the specific cycle. So a general benchmark is 160 will be towards the upper standards for Kafka, while the bare minimum should be 134, which is easily attainable by using a speed boots with Musketeer 4-piece set or the new 2-piece hacker space, right? So that is the speed requirement for Kafka. Now moving on into team speculations. Serval, Luka, Sampo. Who do we pick or who do we invest for Kafka's DOT comp, right? So starting from the first, we have Serval. In CM Bros opinions, she is the weakest out of all 3 DOTs, and here are the reasons why. Number 1, Serval is an erudition unit, and most of Erudition's light cones as well as their traces are crit ratio focused, and there is no good supportive capabilities other than Serval's ultimate extending Kafka's shock by 2 turns, which as of now is already redundant since Kafka can apply permanent shock debuff onto the target by just using her skill herself. Number 2, all of Serval's skills are AoE based, and she will not be as efficient against a single target boss, which is going to be the case in MOC once all the mobs are cleared by Kafka herself, because as we know, Kafka's skill as well as the ultimate are also AoE based. Because of this, Kafka would much rather prefer a DOT that is more single target focused, while also providing her some form of utility in terms of support capabilities, be it in light cones or additional skills, other than strictly just stacking additional DOT. Regarding Sampo, he's gonna be our next in line, basically in the middle category. Sampo on the other hand will scale better than Serval for Kafka, but ultimately he's not gonna be the clear winner between the 3, and here are the reasons why. Now Sampo does have decent multipliers on both his initial and DOT damage. Furthermore, his ultimate also increases DOT damage taken on the target, which would be an excellent synergy with Kafka's shock DOT herself. But this comes with a very big weakness because he needs to use his skill every single turn in order to trigger additional wind shear procs as well as increasing his ultimate uptime. If he doesn't use his skill every single turn, then he's gonna be relying on his basic attack, which basically does not apply any DOT at all or provide any support capabilities, and his ultimate uptime is gonna be much shorter because he doesn't generate enough energy, right? So because of this, it directly competes with Kafka, who also uses her skill every single turn. So if we're gonna be using our skill every single turn for both Sampo and Kafka, our unit 3 and 4, they have to constantly generate skill points. If not, we're definitely going to run into skill point issues. That is his biggest downfall. And this brings us to our final DOT enabler in version 1.2, and that is Luka, and it also happens to be Kafka's best DOT enabler, and here's why. Number 1, Luka's talent enhances his basic attack, which increases damage as well as the toughness multiplier damage, and this makes him an excellent toughness bar breaker without even relying on any skill points. He can be purely self-sufficient by just using his basic attack alone. On this note, the best candidate to use a break effect set on can also be seen from this table of here, right? Physical break far out damages wind break and lightning break, making him the best candidate to break the enemy and triggering even more DOTs, right? So that's number 1. Number 2, Luka's entire kit is also centered on single targets, which is the boss itself. So Kafka can very easily clear the mobs with her skill and her ultimate, while at the same time, Luka can mark the boss with bleed, and once that happens, Kafka can then trigger her plus Luka's DOT, and this creates a perfect synergy. And number 3, Luka's ultimate increases all damage taken, which is essentially the same as Welt or Silverwolf's Incessant Rain Light Cone, and this affects DOT, and that is much better than Sampo's ultimate, which only affects DOT damage taken. So because of this, Luka's ultimate can increase Kafka's skill, ultimate, and follow-up's initial damage all at once. Now, one more bonus unit for players to consider before investing in maybe 2 DOT units is gonna be our Kazillionaire girl, Asta. Asta is the best in slot support for Kafka, as well as pretty much every single DOT characters that we are going to have in the future as well as currently, and these are the same sentiments shared by the English tier crafting community as well. Asta's speed buff is extremely important and beneficial for Kafka because more speed results in more energy generation and results in more turns, and all this accumulates into more DOT triggers. So this is going to greatly increase Kafka's ability to trigger more and more DOTs with a skill and ultimate. Next, Asta has a team-wide attack buff, and this is beneficial for all DOTs that are being run with Kafka since, number 1, DOT does not scale with crit ratio at all. Right? They do not benefit from crit rate buffs or crit damage buff. They do benefit from attack percentage and damage percentage buff. Since this is a team-wide buff, DOTs that are going to be ran with Kafka will also enjoy the same attack buff as well as Kafka. Other supports such as Bronya and Tingyun skills, they only affect a single target, so our alternative sub DPS DOT is not going to be able to benefit from the buff whatsoever. And lastly, this is not a very big reason, but Asta's basic attack can inflict burn herself even though it is a very small multiplier. Still, she is the only support right now that can have DOT on their basic attack, and the more DOT, the merrier it gets for Kafka's DOT comp. So in summary, this is what CM Bros have came up with in terms of a Kafka DOT comp, where we run Kafka, Luka, Asta, as well as a healer, right? It could be Natasha, it could be Bailu, it could be Luocha. But essentially this shows that with purely 4-star units, no 5-star units whatsoever, Kafka's DOT team can in fact take place and clear the content for you. And this brings me to the next question. Is DOT team expensive to race? Now, the biggest disparity from what I've seen between the China community and English community is that the China community do not think that Kafka's DOT team is expensive to raise. In fact, it is the direct opposite for them. Like I mentioned just now, in terms of 5 stars, most other main DPS comps require a 5-star carry as well as a 5-star support minimally. And I'm referring to either Sile, Jingyuan or Welt paired with either Bronya or Silver Wolf. For Kafka, she can be the only 5-star in the DOT team while relying on one other 4-star DOT, be it Serval, Sampo or Luka, one other 4-star support, and that is Asta, and one other 4-star healer, and that is Natasha. In terms of Jade, if players have saved everything up until now, they are easily able to create a Kafka's team from the free units alone, right? Since you do get Serval for free, you do get Asta for free, and you do get Natasha for free. Essentially, you just need to build Kafka and this team will pretty much help you clear the content required. Now, in terms of resources, right? How much resource you need to actually raise these units? The English community is suggesting that it can be difficult to raise multiple DOT units to make Kafka work, especially when you consider that there's different elemental advantages and elemental resistance. Now, this 10 point is a little bit overblown since the only 2 additional units you need to raise are Kafka herself as well as one other additional DOT, and that is Luka, right? Asta and Natasha, especially for free to plays, should already be raised since day 1 as they are soul healer / support, assuming that you did not pull any good gacha units from the pool, right? Now, CM Bros feel there isn't a rate to raise Serval due to the aforementioned reason I mentioned just now, and there also isn't a need to raise Sampo since Luka just pairs that much better with Kafka, even against enemies that have physical resistance. Now, at this point, some of you may say, what if there are enemies that are weak to wind or weak to lightning? If the enemy is not weak to lightning, then you wouldn't even have brought Kafka into the battle in the first place, right? It is like trying to bring an off-element main DPS. The performance will definitely suffer as compared to an on-element DPS. Now, on the other hand, if a player wants to raise Kafka as a support for other DOT carries, then this is gonna be a topic for future content since we lack a 5-star DOT main carry. And let's not pretend that the DOT units now, such as Serval, Sampo, and Luka, can out-damage Kafka's DOT, right? Because Kafka's DOT herself is definitely going to be much higher than the 4-star DOTs we see right now. And this will bring us to the next question from the CM Bros. Is DOT team future-proof? Now, future-proofness is defined as, can you use a specific team composition until the end of service? I would say that any team in Honkai Star Rail is future-proof given enough Radic investment, since Honkai Star Rail's endgame is limited, with a lack of competitive elements such as PvP or leaderboard rankings. However, if future-proofness is defined as, if the current team can have a better future unit that replaces our current 4-star units function, and they function in a similar role, then I would say no. The current DOT team we have right now, it is not future-proof for one simple reason. Without a 5-star DOT DPS, one could say that Kafka's team is more or less incomplete. Because a kid, if you take a look at a kid, is more like an enabler than being a flat-out main DPS. If Kafka was designed as a flat-out main DPS, then MiHoYo wouldn't have implemented her DOT to trigger every single DOT, right? MiHoYo implemented Kafka for a skill and ultimate to trigger all DOTs for a very, very good reason. And that reason is to help her enable future DOT carries that probably will have a much better DOT multiplier than Kafka. And CM Bros believe that when a future higher DOT multiplier 5-star is released, it will replace all our current 4-star DOTs, Luka included. And at this point, Kafka will then be delegated into being a sub DPS / support for herself, triggering our main DPS's 5-star DOT that has a much higher multiplier with Kafka's skill and her ultimate. So if that is the case, should players even consider raising other DOTs, right, such as Serval, Sampo, or even Luka, even though Luka is Kafka's current best sub DPS? This will bring us to the final topic of CN Hypewatch, which is solo Kafka DPS viable right now? Now, instead of relying on other DOTs, some have theorized running Kafka as the sole main DPS, supporting her with Tingyun, Asta, and a healer instead. Now, I'll be directly translating this CM Bro's opinions with the English subtitles. Although this is just his opinion, plenty of other players in the comments supported his thought process. So with that, here is the explanation.
Kafka 为什么一定要依赖副 C 呢？理由呢？你为什么不能用庭云加艾斯达2个辅助呢？为什么一定要练庭云艾斯达？因为庭云艾斯达好多队伍都可以用啊。为什么一定要带卢卡呢？我这么个问题，你为什么不能带庭云加艾斯达2个辅助呢？ 你可以说你辅助不够了，这是可以，一共就这么几个辅助不够了，那还打什么持续伤害？他自己挂雷伤，自己挂持续伤害，自己打自己啊。输出的话应该是再带一个卢卡高，我觉得再带一个卢卡输出应该是高，但是生存压力会变大。卡夫卡一副 C 一辅助一奶妈，这样的生存压力会更大一些啊！一副 C 一辅助一奶妈，生存压力会大，因为只要是输出全都是脆皮。你像这艾斯达1600防御得3400滴血，希尔不到3000滴血，防御只有1000。我主要是认为网上要求的说必须练男性4星 C 卡夫卡才能用，我不认为这样，我不认为卡夫卡自己就可以挂持续伤害啊，自己挂，为什么卡夫卡不能自己挂持续伤害去引爆自己呢？难道卡夫卡必须得引爆其他人的吗？当他只引爆自己的，你比如说你上一个停云，那卡夫卡可以更频繁的开大也会引爆伤害。艾斯达的话就是加速以及加攻击力，伤害不行。如果卡夫卡自己伤害不行，那你直接说卡夫卡现在队伍不行得了。你指望自己伤害不行的5星输出，你上一个4星输出就能够把队伍强度拉起来吗？你是指望4星强度输出拉5星强度输出吗？没有桑博一伤增伤少，说得好。你有了桑博之后加攻击力的辅助还少呢呀？你说呢？你觉得这拐棍很结实吗？说卡夫卡不行，必须组一个牛逼的拐棍，这个牛逼的拐棍是一个4星输出。那你为什么不能看一看其他的角色呢？艾斯达一个大加速，难道不相当于加伤害吗？停云让他多开4大招，难道不相当于加伤害吗？应该赶不上再带个卢卡。你要说从纯算输出，应该比不上算个卢卡。但你要考虑卢卡还是个脆皮机，对一个队伍里有2只脆皮，你真打就会感觉到生存压力大。你如果纯拼输出，什么这个队伍高10%就代表无敌，低10%就代表拉，你要这个思路的话，那你确实得依赖卢卡。
So we've came to the bottom line. Some CM bros feel that it is a waste of resource to even raise the 4-star DOTs since there's a high chance of facing a 5-star power creep in the future. And Ting Yun / Asta / Healer should still enable Kafka to get by our current endgame content for all our players. Ask yourself this: if you can 30 out of 30 MOC with only raising Kafka and using the supports that you have already raised, that is Ting Yun, Asta, and as well as a healer, versus you 30 out of 30 MOC while raising 1 or even 2 more new 4-stars that will likely be power crept, then the answer is clear to the players focused on resource efficiency. It is better to just invest in Kafka alone for now and wait for a future 5-star DOT to come in the future, adding it into Kafka's DOT team to make her even better. Of course, like what the CM bro mentioned just now as well, you could raise Luka to increase the overall damage right now, since Luka does pair with Kafka extremely well, and the damage provided by a Kafka, Luka, Asta healer team should outdamage a damage provided by a Kafka, Ting Yun, Asta healer team. At the end of the day, it just boils down to, do you want to deal as much damage as humanly possible right now, or do you want to be a little bit more efficient with your resources, waiting for a future 5-star DOT to come? And that decision is ultimately going to be made by the players themselves. Now, the only exception is that, like what the CM bro said just now as well, is if you lack enough supports for both teams. And that is to say, you have to use your Ting Yun or the healer or even Asta for the next team, right? You have to use them for the other team. Then, raising a Luka or even Serval or Sampo at this point can be a worthwhile investment. And with that, we have come to the end of our very first episode of CN Hypewatch. If you guys like this idea, do drop a like and comment in the video so that it can help me know that this content is indeed worthwhile to my viewers. With that, that's all I have for today, and I'll see you guys on Kafka's banner. Take care.